In August 2012, this man was worth $35 billion. That made him the seventh richest person on the planet, richer than any oil sheikh you could name, richer than the founders of Google, and he had already told the world, on television, exactly what he intended to do next. He was going to become number one, the single wealthiest human being alive. Just over a year later, it was gone, not most of it. Not the way fortunes usually shrink. In a bad quarter, a market crash, a slow decline, all of it. By 2014, he was no longer a billionaire. He had become something almost no one in the history of money has ever been, a negative billionaire, owing creditors more than $1 billion he had no way to repay. His name is Eike Batista, and the speed of his fall, one of the largest personal fortunes ever assembled, erased in barely a year, is something the financial world is still trying to make sense of. To understand how it vanished, you have to start with how impossibly fast it was built. Eike Batista was born into the orbit of money and power. His father ran Vale, the state mining company that would grow into one of the largest miners on Earth, and served as Brazil's Minister of Mines and Energy. Eike grew up understanding two things in his bones: commodities and ambition. He dropped out of an engineering program in Germany, came home, and at 23 began trading gold in the Amazon. By the 1980s, he was building gold mines. By his late 20s, he was running a mining company in Canada. He didn't want to be rich, he wanted to be the richest. And he said so out loud to anyone who would listen. And he had a talent for being listened to. Because Eike Batista was not a quiet billionaire. He married a Playboy model who became a carnival queen. He was a world champion speedboat racer. He parked a Mercedes worth $250,000 in the living room of his mansion. He was loud, brash, impossible to ignore. And in the 2000s, he found a stage finally big enough for him, Brazil itself, in the middle of the greatest economic boom in its history. Brazil was rising, commodity prices were soaring, the world wanted Brazil's iron, its oil, its everything, and Eike Batista built an empire designed to sell all of it. He called it the EBX Group, and every company inside it ended in the same letter. X, MMX, Mining, MPX, Energy, LLX, Ports and Logistics, OSX, Shipbuilding. The X, he explained, stood for the multiplication of wealth, but the crown jewel, the company that lifted him to 7th richest man alive, was OGX, an oil company. And OGX made a promise that set Brazil on fire. That beneath the ocean off the coast lay some of the richest untapped oil fields in the world, and that Eike Batista was the man who would pull it out of the ground. Investors believed him completely. Money flooded in, from Brazilian pension funds, from ordinary citizens buying his stock, from international giants. In 2012, Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund paid $2 billion for a single slice of his empire. His fortune didn't grow, it detonated from under $10 billion to $35 billion in roughly 2 years. Years earlier, he had told the press he would be the richest man in the world within 5 years. Now it didn't sound insane, it sounded like a schedule. There was only one problem, a problem sitting at the bottom of the ocean. The oil wasn't there, or at least not the way OGX had promised. When the company finally drilled its star offshore fields, the results came back devastating. The wells produced a tiny fraction of the projections. Some were effectively dry. The single asset the entire empire's value rested on, the oil that justified all $35 billion, was, in large part, a mirage. And here is where the structure he had built so cleverly turned into a trap. Because the X companies were never really separate, they were stitched together. OSX built the ships and platforms to drill OGX's oil. LLX built the ports to serve the empire. The power plants, the logistics, the mines, each company's value leaned on the others. It was a chain, and OGX was the first link. When OGX's oil failed, the chain didn't stretch. It snapped. The stock began to fall, then it began to collapse. As investors understood that the oil was never coming, OGX's shares lost almost everything. And because Batista's entire fortune was built out of stock in his own interlocking companies, his net worth didn't quietly decline. It vanished in real time on a public ticker the whole world could watch tick downward by the billions. In October 2013, OGX filed for bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest corporate default in the history of Latin America. The crown jewel fell first, and the rest of the empire followed it down. Within about a year of his peak, Eike Batista's $35 billion had shrunk to a few hundred million. Then it crossed zero. By 2014, he owed more than he owned. A negative fortune of over $1 billion. The man who had promised to become the richest person alive had instead become a different kind of record, proof of how fast modern wealth, when it is built on belief, can disappear the moment the belief does. But the fall wasn't finished, because the questions didn't stop at bad luck and empty wells. As Brazil sank into the largest corruption investigation in its history, one that would eventually reach all the way to its presidents, investigators turned to Eike Batista, and they alleged that the empire had not been built on optimism and oil projections alone, that some of it had been greased. Prosecutors charged that Batista had paid millions of dollars in bribes to Sergio Cabral, the former governor of Rio de Janeiro. In early 2017, he was arrested as he landed in Rio on a flight from New York. He denied any wrongdoing and vowed to clear his name. He did not. In 2018, Eike Batista was convicted of corruption and sentenced to 30 years. The face of Brazil's boom had become the face of its reckoning. What makes this story matter isn't only the size of the number, though the number is staggering. It's what the number was actually made of. Eike Batista was never truly worth $35 billion. He was worth $35 billion of belief. In him, in his oil, in Brazil's future. And belief, unlike gold or iron, can evaporate overnight. He didn't lose a fortune the way most people lose money. He lost the thing the fortune was standing on, and when that gave way, there was nothing underneath. Eike Batista remains one of the fastest collapses of a great fortune the world has ever seen. But he was not the only man to build an empire on a promise that wasn't real, and not even the most audacious. Because on the other side of the world, another man was about to convince entire governments, Hollywood studios, and the global banking system to hand him billions of dollars for a fund that turned out to be, almost from the beginning, a lie. That story is next.